One day, when I was in California, my father and my mother came out to visit with me, and they decided to get together a whole group of the China hands that were in China during the war and after the war. And one of the people that came to visit was a man named Dick Rossi. And so Dick actually was the president of the Flying Tigers Association. They had joined together after the war, and they met for reunions, like a lot of World War II people did. And in my case, I got a chance to talk to Dick, and I said, I'm really interested in knowing more about this group of Flying Tigers. And can you tell me some books to read? And he said, well, there's a lot of books, but most of them are not very accurate. There are some diaries that have been published, but there really is no real story of the Flying Tigers. So then I thought, well, what about a documentary film? And he said, there is no documentary film. There's a movie with John Wayne in it, which is not very accurate, but there is no documentary film. And naive as I was, I said, well, someone should do one. And here's a man who's a fighter pilot. He flew over the hump during the war, after the World War II period of time. A dangerous job. And he kind of looked at me, and I looked at myself, and I thought, well, somebody should do it. And that's how my Flying Tigers documentary career began. And I am now actually a documentary filmmaker that's done a number of other films specializing in World War II. I got involved in a project called the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. And I started to do interviews with veterans of World War II and donated them to our Library of Congress. The heart of that story, of my getting these stories before they were all gone, was born in this particular film. So what I'd like to do this evening is to introduce you to a group of people who are no longer with us. The last Flying Tiger passed away just last year at 100 years old. Several of them lived to be in their 90s. But fortunately, because I have all these interviews and they're part of our national history, they're still alive today. So what made them so special? Well, first of all, we have to understand that during World War II, we know that story. Pearl Harbor happened. The United States got into the war when Pearl Harbor happened. But in actual fact, in China, World War II began in 1937 when Japan invaded China. And the Chinese had no way of being able to defend themselves because at that particular period of time, they didn't have an air force. The Japanese, and as you all know, the Nazis, had very powerful air forces. And so the Chinese had to call upon other people from the outside that had the experience with airplanes, and specifically fighter aircraft. And they went through a whole bunch of different people. The Russians came out for a little while, drank a lot of vodka, never taught any Chinese how to actually fly airplanes. But Claire Chennault, and those of you that don't know who Claire Chennault was, I need to give you some background. He was a pilot who actually was a visionary on fighter aircraft. But in the 30s and into the 40s, even before we got into the war, there was a belief that fighter aircraft were no longer important. And Claire Chennault believed that they were. And so he had an opportunity to come to China to help the Chinese build an air force, and found out very quickly that the Chinese were not going to be able to do it. They had to bring in outside people. And so a very unique thing happened. Across the United States, under a secret order signed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which did not come out until much later, signed an order to go out to the various airfields around the United States and recruit a volunteer air force. And they were called the American Volunteer Group. Now here's the interesting part. We all know we have a very powerful air force. What you may not know is that there was no air force in the United States during that period of time. There's the Army Air Corps, the Navy Air Corps, and the Marine Air Corps. And so they were recruited from all this group. There was 100 pilots and 200 ground crew to support it and medical staff, a little mini Air Force. But those of you that may know about Army, Navy, and Marines, they don't necessarily get along. So how do you get a group of people who are Army, Navy, and Marines together to work together? And that was the amazing thing about Claire Lee Chennault. Here's the other thing. They were able to get 100 P-40s, These P-40s were destined for Europe to go to England to help fight the Battle of London, but the British got a chance to get a newer version of P-40, and Chenault was stuck with 100 of these antiquated P-40s, which, by the way, did not have radios, did not have guns, and didn't even have the sights to be able to shoot. So now you've got 100 pilots that had never flown a P-40 about to go to China and take on the strongest air force at that time. One of the things I'd like to get across to you tonight is that if you've watched World War II documentaries, if you've seen things on the History Channel, too often you see stock footage. Because of my relationship with my father, I was able to get from the Flying Tigers home movies that had never been seen before, pictures that had never been seen before in any books. And so what you're going to see today are images of people talking about events, and the events are actually there. Because when they all arrived to go to China, they actually bought state-of-the-art film cameras, including color.